I used to think people who talked about karma were full of it. It always sounded like one of those comforting lies people tell themselves so the world feels balanced. Bad people get punished. Good people get rewarded. Everything eventually evens out. That's what I thought. Until the semester, I learned how terrifying it feels to become the exact kind of victim you once made excuses for. I'm not proud of what I did. Honestly, even writing this makes me feel sick. But if I'm going to tell this story, I have to be honest about the kind of person I was back then. This happened during my second year at Black Ridge State University, a small college tucked into northern Ohio. At the time, I was 20 years old. Quiet, awkward. The kind of person who could go an entire day on campus without speaking to anyone unless a professor called on me. I wasn't bullied. I wasn't hated. I was just invisible. And for most of my life, that hadn't bothered me. Being alone felt normal. Safe, even. Then I met Claire Whitmore. We got paired together for a communications project. Nothing special, just one of those random professor assignments where you spend a few weeks pretending to care about group collaboration. Claire was easy to talk to. That was the first thing I noticed. She had this effortless way of making conversation feel natural. No awkward pauses, no forced politeness. The kind of person who could make you feel comfortable without even trying. We met twice in the library to work on the project. Maybe 3 hours total. That was all it took. By the second meeting, I'd convinced myself there was something there. Not because she flirted, not because she gave me any reason to think that, just because she was nice to me. And for someone like me back then, basic kindness felt intoxicating. The night after our second library session, I looked her up online. At first, it felt harmless. People do that all the time. You meet someone, get curious, check their social media. Normal. But curiosity has a way of becoming obsession if you feed it. Within an hour, I'd found her Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, even an old track team profile from high school. I scrolled through years of photos, learned the names of her friends, the coffee shop she liked, the gym she went to, the places she tagged most often. It felt like assembling a puzzle, and every piece made me feel like I knew her better. That should have been where I stopped. Instead, I kept digging. One night while scrolling through her Instagram, I noticed a neighborhood street sign in the background of one of her posts. Another photo showed the front of a house across the street. A third included a partial address number on a mailbox. It didn't take much. Within 30 minutes, I'd narrowed down where she lived. A quiet residential neighborhood called Ashwood Estates, about 15 minutes from campus. I remember sitting there staring at the address on my laptop screen, feeling this weird electric rush. Even then, I knew crossing that line made me a creep. But I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. I just wanted to see. So 2 nights later, I drove there. I parked halfway down the block around 10 p.m. Her house was exactly where I expected. 2 stories, white siding, a red Honda in the driveway with a university parking decal. The upstairs bedroom light was on. I stared at that window for almost 20 minutes. I kept imagining she was up there, reading, watching TV, living her life completely unaware some stranger from class was sitting outside. It should have disgusted me. Instead, it thrilled me. That became my routine. 2 or 3 nights a week, I'd drive past her street. Sometimes I'd park. Sometimes I'd just slow down enough to glance at the house, always telling myself I wasn't doing anything technically illegal. That delusion lasted about 3 weeks. Then, one night, everything changed. I was parked farther down the street than usual when I saw movement in the upstairs window. The blinds shifted, just slightly, and I saw the unmistakable outline of someone standing there, watching. My entire body went cold. I don't know if it was Claire. Could have been a parent, a sibling, anyone. But whoever it was had definitely noticed my car. I drove off so fast my tires squealed. The whole ride home, panic chewed through me. What if they'd written down my plate? What if they reported me? What if Claire knew? The next morning, I nearly skipped class, but forcing myself to act normal seemed smarter than disappearing. When Claire walked in, she acted exactly as always, smiling, relaxed, no sign she recognized me. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, halfway through class, she leaned over to another girl in our row and casually said, "I swear some creep's been parked outside my house lately." The words hit me like a punch. She laughed awkwardly after saying it, but there was tension in her voice. The girl beside her asked if she'd told anyone. Claire nodded. "My dad's keeping an eye out." I felt sick. For the rest of class, I couldn't focus, couldn't breathe normally. I kept waiting for her to turn and accuse me. She never did. After that, I stopped. No more social media stalking, no more driving by her house, no more checking her profiles every night. Fear killed the obsession instantly. And for a while, I thought that was the end of it. Then, the tapping started. The first time it happened around 11 p.m. I was in my bedroom at my grandparents' old house just outside town. My parents had inherited it after both grandparents passed, but they'd moved south for work and let me stay there while I attended college. It was an old place, 2 stories, lots of creaking floors and rattling pipes, the kind of house that made random noises all the time. So when I heard the faint tap against my bedroom window, I ignored it. Probably a branch. The second night, it happened again. 3 distinct taps. Slow, intentional. I looked toward the window but didn't get up. The blinds were shut. I told myself it was still just a branch. Then came the third night. This time the sound moved. Tap, tap, tap. First at my bedroom window, then 5 minutes later at the hallway window, then downstairs near the kitchen, like someone was circling the house, testing every pane of glass. That's when fear finally overpowered denial. I shut off every light, locked my bedroom door, and sat on my bed listening. For over an hour, the tapping continued, always shifting, always moving, never random. It stopped just before 1 a.m. I barely slept. The next morning, I checked outside. No branches near the windows, no obvious explanation. But in the damp soil beneath my bedroom window, there were footprints. At least 2 different sizes. Over the next week, it escalated. Sometimes I'd glimpse movement through the edges of the blinds, a shadow standing too close to the glass. Other times I'd hear footsteps crunching slowly across the gravel path outside. Always after dark, always circling. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary. Stopped attending class, stopped answering calls. I ordered food delivery and left notes telling drivers not to knock. Paranoia consumed me. And somewhere in the middle of all that fear, one thought kept surfacing. Claire. Had she figured it out? Had she told someone? Was this revenge? It made sense. Too much sense. Finally, after 3 days of unanswered messages, Claire texted me. "Hey, are you okay? You've missed class all week." I stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes. Then, in a moment of panicked stupidity, I replied, "Please tell your friends to stop coming to my house." The typing bubble appeared immediately, disappeared, reappeared, then finally, "What are we talking about?" I felt my stomach drop. I tried to recover, said I'd meant to text someone else. She responded with a confused, "Okay," and nothing more. That should have reassured me. It didn't, because if it wasn't Claire, then I had no idea who was outside my house.
And that same night, just after midnight, my doorbell rang.
The doorbell rang again. Not a quick press, not some accidental bump. Whoever was outside held it down long enough for the chime to stretch into a harsh, mechanical whine that echoed through the entire house. I froze on the edge of my bed, every muscle in my body locked up. The old house was dead silent otherwise. No footsteps, no voices, just that prolonged electronic hum fading into stillness. Then it rang a third time, longer, demanding. My bedroom was on the second floor, but from where I sat, I could hear the faint vibration through the floorboards. Someone was leaning on it, waiting. I stared at my locked bedroom door like it might somehow protect me. It wouldn't. The front door downstairs was old, mostly wood with a narrow frosted glass panel in the center. Anyone determined enough could break through it in seconds. For almost a full minute, nothing happened. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, heavy thuds. A pause, then 3 more. Not frantic, not angry, patient. Like whoever stood outside knew I was home and had all the time in the world. My breathing became shallow. I grabbed my phone and considered calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone rang my doorbell? Knocked on my door? They'd think I was paranoid, and considering how badly my nerves had been unraveling all week, maybe I was. Then I heard a voice, low, male, muffled through the floor and walls. Open the door. The words were calm, controlled. That somehow made them infinitely worse. I backed away from my bedroom door until my calves hit the bed. Then the voice came again, louder this time. We know you're in there. Plural. We. The air left my lungs. There was more than one person outside. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then instinct finally kicked in. I turned off my phone screen, crouched beside the bed, and stayed completely still. The knocking continued. Then the doorbell again, over and over, for nearly 2 minutes, and then it stopped. The silence afterwards was somehow worse. I stayed crouched there for what felt like forever, straining to hear movement. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no car starting outside. Just silence. Eventually, maybe 30 minutes later, I worked up enough nerve to crawl to the window. Very slowly, I peeled back the blinds. The front yard was empty. The driveway was empty. No one stood on the porch. But something sat directly in the center of the walkway leading to the front steps. A small yellow flower. My stomach dropped. The same kind of flower I'd seen planted all over Claire's neighborhood. I let the blind fall shut and stumbled backward. I didn't sleep that night. The second sunlight hit the windows, I threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove straight to my parents' condo nearly 40 minutes away. I lied. Told them the house was having plumbing issues and I needed to stay for a few days. They didn't question it. For the first time all week, I felt safe. No tapping, no shadows, no footsteps, no flowers. And for a while, I convinced myself leaving had solved everything. Maybe whoever it was had simply moved on. Maybe it had all been some elaborate prank. Maybe I'd overreacted. Then, 4 days later, Claire texted me again. Professor Hensley says if you miss one more class, you automatically fail the project. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I'll be there tomorrow. Her response came quickly. Good. You've been acting weird. That single sentence made my skin crawl, not because it was threatening, because it was true. I'd become exactly what I'd feared, a paranoid wreck. The next morning, I forced myself back to campus. Walking into that classroom felt surreal after hiding away for days. Claire was already there. She smiled when she saw me. A normal, casual smile. No tension, no suspicion, no hidden meaning. If she knew anything, she hid it perfectly. After class, she stopped me near the door. Hey, she said. You okay? I nodded too fast. Yeah, just dealing with some stuff. She studied my face for a moment, then said something that made my chest tighten. My dad caught someone outside our house last week. I felt my throat go dry. What? She shrugged. Not caught exactly. He chased them off. I couldn't speak. She gave a nervous laugh. Probably just some neighborhood creep. Then she walked away. I stood there rooted to the floor. Because the timing didn't make sense. I hadn't been anywhere near her house in weeks, so if someone had been there, it wasn't me. That thought stayed with me all day, and by that evening, curiosity overpowered fear. I drove back to my house, not to stay, just to check. The sun was setting when I pulled into the driveway. Everything looked normal, until I walked inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Fresh flowers. Dozens of them. Yellow flowers covered my kitchen counter, my dining table, the floor, the staircase. Some were loose, others arranged carefully in small glass cups I recognized from my own cabinets. In the center of the kitchen island sat a folded note. My hands shook as I opened it. 3 words were written in elegant cursive. Now you understand. I dropped the note. For several seconds, I just stared. Then I heard it. A soft creak from upstairs. Not the settling groan of old wood. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was in the house. Adrenaline hit me like a shockwave. I backed towards the front door. Another creak. Then another. Crossing the second-floor hallway, moving towards the stairs. I didn't wait. I bolted outside, slammed the door behind me, and sprinted to my car. As I fumbled with the keys, movement caught my eye. Across the street stood an older man and woman, mid-60s maybe, both dressed neatly, both staring directly at me. The woman smiled and slowly raised her hand. In it was another yellow flower. The man beside her never blinked, never moved. They just watched. I got in the car and tore out of there so fast I nearly clipped a mailbox. I drove straight to the police station, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, I told the truth. Mostly. I left out Claire, left out the stalking, but I told them about the house, the flowers, the footsteps, the couple. An officer went with me that night. When we arrived, the house was empty. No flowers, no note, nothing. The officer searched every room. No sign anyone had been there. No forced entry, no evidence. He looked at me the way people look at someone they suspect is unraveling. He suggested stress, sleep deprivation, maybe seeing someone about anxiety. I never went back. I broke the lease 2 weeks later and moved permanently in with my parents until graduation. Nothing else happened after that. No tapping, no flowers, no shadows, no notes. Claire and I finished the semester with minimal conversation. We never spoke again after finals. And to this day, I still don't know who was outside my house. Maybe it was someone connected to Claire. Maybe it was that older couple. Maybe it was karma taking human form. What I do know is this. I spent weeks violating someone's privacy, watching from the dark, convincing myself harmless obsession wasn't really harm. Then, someone made sure I understood exactly what it feels like to be watched, to feel unsafe in your own home, to dread the sound of glass being tapped in the middle of the night. I never stalked anyone again, never even came close. Some lessons don't need repeating. And every now and then, when I'm lying awake late at night and hear a branch brush softly against my window, I still think of that note. Now you understand. There's something deeply wrong with me. At least, there used to be. I've spent years trying to figure out what kind of person can cross the lines I crossed and still sleep at night. The answer, I think, is simple. You stop seeing people as real. That's how it starts. You reduce them to routines, patterns. Lights switching off at predictable hours, cars leaving driveways at exactly 8:15 every morning, shadows moving behind curtains. You stop thinking about the lives being lived inside those homes. You stop imagining them as people. They become opportunities. And once that happens, doing terrible things feels surprisingly easy. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 24 and living alone in a rental house just outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was working part-time stocking shelves at a grocery store overnight. No future, no ambition, no relationships. My entire life felt like one endless cycle of work, sleep, repeat. I wasn't depressed exactly, just hollow. Like there was some missing piece inside everyone else had been born with. I spent most of my free time wandering neighborhoods after dark, not because I was exercising, not because I had anywhere to go. I just liked walking, watching, observing the little glimpses of other people's lives through their windows. Families eating dinner, couples watching television, someone folding laundry, someone pacing while talking on the phone. Normal things, ordinary things. Things I'd never really had. At first, I told myself I was just curious. Then, one afternoon, curiosity became something else. I was cutting through a newer subdivision called Maple Ridge Estates on my way home from work. Most of the houses were massive compared to my tiny rental. 2-story brick homes with manicured lawns and expensive SUVs parked outside. I noticed a white pickup truck pulling away from one of the driveways. Construction company logo on the side. A few minutes later, 2 workers came out of the house carrying tool bags and left for lunch. As I passed, I noticed the front door hadn't latched all the way. It sat slightly ajar. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped, looked up and down the street. Nobody. The neighborhood was dead quiet. Without really thinking about it, I walked up the driveway and pushed the door open. I still remember how loud my heartbeat sounded stepping inside that house. The cool air conditioning, the faint smell of fresh paint, the polished hardwood floors beneath my shoes. It felt unreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's world. I wasn't there to steal anything, that's the strange part. I just wanted to look. So I did. I walked through every room, the kitchen with its marble counters, the upstairs bedrooms, the finished basement with a giant home theater setup. I opened drawers, peeked into closets, stood in the center of rooms imagining what it must feel like to live there, to belong there. I stayed for maybe 15 minutes before leaving. And when I stepped back outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Pure electric adrenaline. For the first time in forever, I felt alive. That should have scared me. It didn't. It thrilled me. A week later, I did it again. Different house, same subdivision. This time, I waited until I was certain the owners had gone to work. I'd watched them leave at 7:42 a.m. I entered through an unlocked side door, spent 20 minutes inside, left unnoticed. That became my secret addiction. I got methodical, obsessive. I'd spend days watching houses from a distance, learning routines, when people left, when they returned, which windows stayed open, which doors were forgotten. It became a game of patience and precision, and every successful entry fed something dark inside me. At first, I only looked. I never touched anything, never moved anything, never stole. That was my justification. I'm not hurting anyone, I'm just observing. But eventually, even that lost its thrill. The rush faded. Breaking in became too easy, too familiar. And once that happened, I needed something more. That's when I became what I privately called the reverse thief. Instead of taking things, I started leaving them behind. Small objects, subtle enough to create doubt, noticeable enough to spark questions. The first thing I left was a blue ceramic mug in a kitchen cabinet where it clearly didn't belong. then a paperback novel tucked beneath couch cushions, then a framed photograph of strangers placed on a bookshelf. The idea fascinated me. I'd imagined the homeowners discovering these things, the confusion, the arguments, the paranoia. How long had that been there? Did you put that there? Was someone inside our house? Not knowing their reactions made it even better. My imagination filled in the gaps. And the more I did it, the bolder I became. One Thursday in October, everything changed. I came home from work around 6:30 a.m., exhausted. The sun was barely up. I walked into my kitchen and immediately froze. Sitting in the center of my table was a small glass vase. Inside was a single yellow daisy. I hadn't bought flowers, hadn't had anyone over, and I knew with absolute certainty that vase had not been there when I left for work. Beneath it was a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. 3 words were written in neat cursive handwriting. "We know. Stop." I read it 3 times. My stomach turned cold. I searched the house, every room, every closet, every window and door. All locked. No sign of forced entry. No missing belongings. Nothing else out of place. Just the flower and the note. For hours, I sat at my kitchen table staring at them, trying to convince myself it was some kind of prank. Maybe my landlord. Maybe a friend. Except I didn't have friends, and nobody knew what I was doing. Nobody. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house made me bolt upright. Every shifting shadow looked human. Morning came and nothing happened. Then, the next day, I came home from work and found another gift waiting for me. This time, it was on my bed. A child's toy car, identical in color and model to my own sedan. And beneath it, another note. This one said, "You've been inside ours. Soon we'll stay inside yours." That was the exact moment I heard footsteps moving slowly across my basement floor. I stood frozen in my bedroom doorway. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation. Paranoia. The kind of auditory trick your brain plays when fear has already convinced you something is wrong. Then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate shuffle, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping lightly across concrete. My basement floor. There was no mistaking it. Someone was down there. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I stood perfectly still, listening. Another scrape. Then, what sounded like 2 low voices murmuring to each other. Too muffled to make out words, but definitely voices. Plural. My entire body went cold. I backed out of the bedroom as quietly as I could and stepped into the hallway. The layout of the house suddenly felt like a trap. My bedroom was upstairs. The front door sat at the bottom of the staircase, only a few feet from the basement entrance. To leave, I'd have to pass directly beside the door leading downstairs, beside whoever might come through it. For nearly a minute, I stood there debating. Then, a loud knock sounded from beneath the basement door. 3 hard raps from the other side. Not random noise. Not pipes settling. Someone was knocking from inside my house. That broke whatever paralysis had gripped me. I moved. Fast, but careful. Every stair creaked beneath my weight, and each sound felt deafening. Halfway down, another knock hit the basement door. Harder this time. Then came a voice. Soft. Almost cheerful. "Come down." I nearly lost my footing. The voice was female, older, and somehow familiar, though I couldn't place why. I didn't stop moving. The moment my feet hit the first floor, I bolted for the front door. My hand shook so badly I fumbled the deadbolt twice. Behind me, I heard the basement doorknob rattle, then turn. The door was opening. I yanked the front door wide, sprinted outside, and threw myself into my car. I didn't even bother closing the house door behind me. As I reversed out of the driveway, I looked back and saw them, standing just inside my front doorway. An older man and woman, late 50s, maybe early 60s. The woman wore a pale cardigan and held something in her hands. The man stood beside her, expressionless, watching. The woman slowly raised her hand and waved. Then, she smiled, and in her hand, I saw another yellow daisy. I slammed the car into drive and tore down the street. I didn't stop until I reached my parents' house 25 minutes away. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out when my mother opened the door. I lied, of course. Told them someone had broken into my house, that I was scared to stay there. I didn't tell them why. Didn't tell them about the houses, the notes, the things I'd left behind. I slept on their couch that night with every light in the living room turned on. The next morning, my father insisted on going back with me. He brought a baseball bat. I considered calling the police but stopped myself. How would I explain any of this without exposing myself? When we arrived, the front door was shut, locked. No signs of forced entry. Inside, everything was immaculate. No overturned furniture, no footprints, no yellow daisies, no toy car, no notes. Nothing. It looked exactly as it had before. My father searched the basement. Empty. No sign anyone had been there. He gave me the same look people reserve for someone they suspect is unraveling. Concern mixed with doubt. He suggested maybe I was overtired, overworked, maybe imagining things. I almost let him believe him, until I walked into my kitchen. Sitting in the center of the table was a small white envelope. It hadn't been there moments earlier. I know that because I'd looked directly at that table when we entered. My father was still downstairs when I opened it. Inside was a single line written in elegant cursive. Tell him what you've done. The blood drained from my face. I folded the note and shoved it into my pocket before my father came back upstairs. That was the moment I knew this wasn't random. Whoever was doing this knew exactly who I was, and they wanted me terrified. For the next week, I stayed with my parents. Nothing happened. No messages, no flowers, no footsteps. Eventually, I convinced myself maybe it was over. Then my landlord called. He asked if I'd given anyone access to my house. I said no. He told me several neighbors had complained about an older couple repeatedly standing outside my property late at night. Just standing there, watching the house. Never approaching, never speaking. Just watching. I broke my lease that same day. Didn't even pack everything. I went back in broad daylight with my father and loaded only essentials. The whole time, I felt watched. Every window on every neighboring house felt like an eye. As we were loading the last box into his truck, I glanced across the street. And there they were, the same couple, standing on the sidewalk. The woman smiled. The man stared. Neither moved. Neither spoke. But the woman held something against her chest. A framed photograph. Even from that distance, I recognized it. It was the exact same framed photo I'd left months earlier inside someone else's house. The one with the smiling family of 4. She lifted it slightly, as if showing it to me. My father noticed them too. He asked if I knew them. I said no. He started walking towards them. The second he stepped off the driveway, they turned and calmly walked away. Not hurried, not panicked, just gone. I never saw them again. I moved 3 towns over after that, started fresh, quit my job, went to therapy, and for the first time in years, admitted to another human being what I'd been doing. Breaking into homes, leaving things behind, treating people's private spaces like stages for my own twisted amusement. The therapist called it compulsive boundary violation behavior rooted in isolation and detachment. That's the clinical version. The honest version is simpler. I was a predator. Not violent, not physically dangerous, but harmful all the same. I invaded lives for fun. And eventually, someone invaded mine. To this day, I have no idea who that couple was. Maybe homeowners who finally caught on. Maybe private investigators hired by suspicious victims. Maybe something stranger. Something darker. I've tried searching. Nothing. No records. No names. No answers. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up thinking I hear footsteps in my basement. And every spring, without fail, I'll find a single yellow daisy somewhere it shouldn't be. On my porch, inside my mailbox, once tucked under my windshield wiper. No note, no explanation, just the flower. A quiet reminder.